What's up developers, it's Dari here from Code with Dari, and welcome back to a new video where we're going to have a look at how we can use route parameters in Laravel. So far, we covered basic routes that work fine when you want to return something for a static URL. But real-world applications aren't just static. Think about a user profile page. It's not always /user, it's usually /user, /1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, depending on which user you're looking at. That's where route parameters come in. Route parameters allows us to capture values straight from the URL and use them inside our route logic. Let's replace the return statement that we have right here, and let's just return blog overview. And let's change the URI to /blog. This route will only ever match the exact same URL. So if we navigate to the browser, change our endpoint to /blog, you'll notice that it works. But if we do /1 right after it, Laravel returns a 404 since the page is not found. Let's navigate back to PHP Storm and let's duplicate our route right below of it. And let's add a / right after our URI of blog. And when defining route parameters in Laravel, you have to use a set of curly braces, followed with the route parameter name inside of it. So let's name it ID. Then inside our return statement of our route, let's get rid of the string that we have, and let's return a variable ID. As you can see right now, we're getting an error. And that's happening because the variable that we have defined in our return statement is not recognized. This can be fixed by adding an argument ID inside the function. So let's say ID, and you'll see that the error disappeared. This might seem like a lot, so let's unpack what we just did, but this time from the browser's view. So let's navigate back to Google Chrome. We have a /blog endpoint, right? But we have also defined a second one where we added a route parameter. This can be anything. So if we visit /blog /10, hit enter, you'll notice that our route parameter of ID, which is equal to 10, has been printed out. And if we change it to 55, you'll notice that 55 has also been printed out. And nice to know is that, and it's actually something you will be using, is that you're not limited to just one parameter. You can add as many as you want. So let's say that we want to output a specific blog of a specific user. So the URI would look like user / let's say user ID, because we can't use the name ID twice. And I would also recommend renaming the ID to blog ID. Then once again, we need to replace our variable ID inside our function because it needs to match the route parameter names that we have passed in. So let's say user ID and we have blog ID. And instead of returning an ID, let's return user ID is concatenate the user ID, and blog ID is concatenate blog ID. Let's navigate to the browser. Let's change our endpoint to, let's say, user1 has blog 10. And it outputs user ID is 1 and blog ID is 10. Let's take it a step further and see where it gets even more powerful. Laravel doesn't just pass in URL parameters into your function. It also supports something which is called dependency injection. And dependency injection is a design pattern where you don't create the object your code needs. Instead, you declare them as dependencies and Laravel server's container automatically provides them. This makes your code cleaner, easier to test, and less tightly coupled to specific implementations. Let's get rid of our two variables inside our function. Let's also get rid of the user part. So we have /blog and ID again. And let's keep the return statement for now. So inside our function, you can type hint the request by saying request, import illuminate HTTP, followed with an object named request. Then we also have the ID right here, so let's pass that in as well. And let's say that the blog ID is the ID. Then instead of saying the blog ID is, let's say, and the full URL is, And here's where the magic comes into play. Let's replace block ID with our request object. And let's chain the full URL method to it. Now Laravel does something very cool right here. It sees that we have type hinted request. It goes to its internal service container, creates a request object for the current request, and passes it into the function automatically. So we didn't have to write down new request and then say request is equal to something. Let's navigate to Google Chrome and let's change our endpoint to block 10. You see that block ID is 10 and the full URL is the URL that we have right here. Now you might wonder, does it not expect request in the URL? Just as we have with our route parameter of ID. Now here's what's happening. The ID variable comes from the URL. We defined a route parameter ID, so when we visit block 10, Laravel grabs 10 and passes it directly into ID right here. But request is completely different. It doesn't come from the URL, it comes from Laravel service provider. When Laravel sees the type hint of request, it knows, okay, this function depends on a request object, and it automatically creates it and injects it for you. That's called dependency injection. Now let's move on to optional parameters. Sometimes you don't want a parameter to be required. Maybe you want a route that greets a user by a name. But if no name is provided, it should be default to guest. Let's change our endpoint to, let's say, hello/name. But you can make a parameter optional by adding a question mark to the end of its name. So it would be name ? We don't need our request object right now, but we do need to replace our variable ID inside our function, which should be variable name. Then inside our return statement, let's return hello, and let's concatenate the name to it. Now, let's navigate back to Google Chrome. Let's visit the URI of hello/Dari. You notice that hello Dari has been printed out. Let's just visit hello. You'll notice that we have run into an error. And this is happening because variable name needs to have a default, which we can do by setting it equal to guest. If we navigate back to Google Chrome, refresh it, you'll see that hello guest has been printed out. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is called regular expression constraint. This is where we can control what kind of value a parameter is allowed to take. Now, by default, the route parameter will match anything. So if we add a number of 50 right here, it would say hello 50. But let's say that we want to restrict this specifically to numbers or letters. This is where the where method on the get method comes into place, where we need to chain the where method, where we want to say that the variable name, where we need to pass in the expression. So let's say brackets, capital A dash capital Z, and then lowercase a to Z. And it also has a plus right after it. Let's navigate back to Google Chrome. Let's refresh it. You'll see that the page has not been found. Since we have passed in a number, let's change it back to Dari again. You'll see that hello Dari has been printed out. And it also works the other way around. So we could also say numbers 0-9 with the plus, where hello needs to be ID. So let's change it inside the function. Let's give it a default of 1 and let's output hello ID. And one more thing, we need to replace the name, which is ID. Refresh it, you'll see a 404. Let's change it to 10, where it has returned hello 10. Alright, this was it for now. I want to wrap up this video where I showed you the basics of how you can work with route parameters in Laravel. Please make sure that you're subscribed, turn on the bell notification and follow along because we're going to go deeper and deeper, but in a simple beginner-friendly way. Thank you for watching this video, and in the next video, we're going to have a look at how we can define and use named routes in Laravel.